That's great. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Community Data Programs Workshop with Heath Kristen on Target Group Profiles. This is an introduction to a very useful template that he has created. So my name is Mary. I'm part of the Community Data Program team, and I'm hosting today's webinar. Our presenter today, as I said, is Heath, and he's been a member of our Community Data Program for a while now, and he's with the City of Toronto. So thank you, Heath, for being here with us today. And we also have Mike Dieter and Julie online with us. They're as well part of our program team. They will be available to answer some questions and things as we go as well. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to our audience as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, you'll be able to use the chat box on your screen, and you can ask any questions about the presentation to Heath himself. You can also let us know if you're having any technical problems, and we'll try to get those ironed out as quickly as we can so we can get the most out of our presentation. Heath is going to share a few slides on the screen in front of you, and then he's going to walk you through the template by sharing his computer screen. So at this point, we're going to get into a bit more detailed stuff. So I really strongly encourage you to maximize your screen so you can see all the details of what's happening. So without any further introduction, I'm going to hand it straight over to Heath. So thank you again, Heath.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks for everyone with the CDP for helping set this up today. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Oh, the participants number has just jumped enormously. That's great to see. So we've got lots of folks just logging in. Hello, welcome. So my name is Heath Priston. I work for the City of Toronto, and I've been involved with the Community Data Program for about 4 years now. I've been involved as a staff lead at the City of Toronto, helping support a lot of different pieces of work at the CDP, but particularly being involved in the data purchase and access working group and the capacity building and training working group. Hopefully today, those two passions will come together in the tool that I'm thrilled to share with you today, that I hope you will be able to make good use of as well, and use it to make even better use of the Target Group Profiles product. In my work at the City of Toronto, a lot of the work that I have done is around sharing and disseminating knowledge from data products like the census. So I work with a lot of people who work in policy around particular populations, be that newcomers or youth or seniors or racialized populations, as well as communities within the City of Toronto as well. And these are tools that are useful for all of those, but I also recognize that as we had these TGP files starting to arrive, I would have a lot of different demands from different people who'd want to be able to know about the particular populations that they're working with as quickly and as soon as possible. And I realized one of the great things about the Target Group Profiles is that they provide us with a whole variety of different looks on populations in the census, but in a consistent format that actually makes it really easy to develop a template for to quickly extract the information. And so that's what we're here to dig into today, is the tool that I developed initially for myself to be able to quickly get information out, but then realized there's no reason for just me to be benefiting from having built that. It's something that can be easily shared and used by everyone who has access to these files. So that's what we're doing today. So so welcome, and thank you for your interest. Here's our agenda for the workshop today. First of all, I just want to do a quick kind of overview of the Target Group Profiles for those of you who are wanting to get a bit of a background around the Target Group Profile. Then we'll move right into the tool itself. We'll have a look at the content and how it works, and then I'll give a couple of examples, take you right through extracting the info and pasting it into the tool, and what you should see, what you should look out for. And then finally, we should have plenty of time for questions and discussion as well. So, Target Group Profiles. What are they? Hopefully most of you have an idea of them, but I think it's useful to point out that they're a cut of the census profile data that focus on a specific target group. So they also happen to be one of the most popular downloads that we see from the Community Data catalog. And of course, in a target group profile table, all the variables in the target group profile relate to the persons who are within this group. So their age, their gender, their family status, the languages they speak, and so on. I just wanted to show you another example of how we have started looking at using target group profiles as well. Today I'm very much focusing on direct comparison between either a target group profile and another target group, or between two geographies with the same target group. But it is also useful to know that you can compare, of course, particular elements of the target group profile. So, for instance, one of the things that was really useful about the census data this time around, there was a new addition of linking for immigrants who arrived in Canada, who landed in Canada post-1980. There was category data around what category of immigrant they were, and so we were particularly interested in looking at those different populations. One of those categories, of course, is the refugee category. But recognizing that there's quite a difference between a refugee who landed in and settled in Canada in the 1980s as opposed to a refugee who landed and settled in the last 5 years, we thought, well, one of the interesting things to do would be to look at the refugee category data for recent immigrants. So I apologize, the map looks a little bit blurry there, and for those of you not familiar with Toronto, you'll really, what you're seeing here is that we go from a pattern where there's quite a spread, although certainly concentrated in parts of the city, but it's really helped us find that there are a couple of communities within the city that are really the focus point of settlement for recent immigrants who were landed as refugees and who are settled in Toronto. So that's obviously, a different angle on the data, but a useful one. This is using census tract level data to understand settlement patterns across one particular city. But I just wanted to make sure we kept in mind there's lots of uses of it outside of the template we're going to look at today. But I wanted to, and I think maybe the template is actually a really useful point to first start to identify these kinds of data points and say, oh, these are the ones that I'd actually really like to see a bit more of a spatial pattern within my community as well. So just a few quick points to make about target group profiles. The first is that these profiles are data about individuals. They provide data about individual people who meet the definition of a target group. So they don't contain data around family or household specific variables, things like housing tenure, affordability of housing, those kinds of things are not included there. This is only data about individuals that are within the main census profile. Also, the data the target group profiles draw information from a particular universe that's called persons living in private households. Whereas the regular census profile, for a variety of different topics, draw from a different kind of population universe. So, I've got an example on the next page, but whereas those different population universes are present in different topics in the census profile, the standard census profile, for target group profiles, it's always a 25% sample of the population of people living in private households. So for example, if we were to try and compare information and counts from the regular census profile, this is just a quick screenshot of the census profile that you can access on Statistics Canada's website. So for Canada, that number there, which is knowledge of official languages, we have a total population for the knowledge of official languages data of 34,767,000. Whereas if I were to look at that same number and try and compare it to the knowledge of official languages for the population private households from one of the target group profiles, you can see we're missing a couple 100,000. And that's because the main census profile for this particular language category draws from the total population excluding institutional residents, whereas it's a smaller universe that we're drawing from for the target group profile. So there are ways we can work around that, because there are ways to get total population numbers from some of the select target group profiles, and that's good to know. But we should be careful about drawing comparisons between the target group profiles and any other census profile products. The link there at the bottom of the page will take you to a little bit more information about the different universes that are present in the census profile. I'll give you a sec if you want to click that and open that in another browser, but we can come back to that if there are questions too. Finally, the third thing I think that's important to keep in mind is that very often when you start looking at very specific populations, you can really start drilling down and getting a much smaller group that you're looking at. If you're looking at a particular target group that has a much smaller population or is really heavily concentrated only in some areas in the community you're interested in looking at, you can run into some challenges based on the data suppression and random rounding practices that Statistics Canada engages in with these products in the name of protecting privacy of Canadians. So as a result, it's really useful, and hopefully this tool can help you kind of quickly have a quick look to see, okay, have we got enough observations at the census tract level for this to be useful for our needs, or do we need to think about looking at this at a larger geographic scale so that we get enough observations in the area that we're looking at so that we don't get weird or really small suppressed data points. So hopefully you've all had the opportunity to already engage in downloading a community data program file from the community data website. If you haven't, please hold off on logging to the website and trying to get one right this instant, because I have a feeling we'll risk crashing the website with everyone running at once. But maybe we'll be able to get a couple downloaded if you haven't got one at hand right now. And I'll take you through that really quickly. But basically, once you've downloaded it, you're going to open that up, and you hopefully have Beyond 2020 browser installed, because that's the browser that allows you to access the AVI files that we get from Statistics Canada. And I see there's a question there about data availability beyond census tracts. Yes, there is geographies, a range of geographies available. And Mike, you look like you're typing an answer, so I'll let you maybe respond to that. But yes, there is a whole range of different geographies available in those. So you can certainly access more than just a census tract, for example. Okay, well, so I'm just going to take a quick drink of water here, pardon me. So let's see. So the template itself, there's just a couple of things I want to mention before I jump right into the demonstration here. What's the point of the tool? Really, it's about being able to quickly and simply extract data from the IVT files, which aren't necessarily all that user-friendly, and also to some degree organized for the convenience of extraction. You'll see a bit when we have a look at the tables as well. And so to pull the data out of that and organize it in a way that is a bit more easily accessible, is more consistent with the way Statistics Canada usually presents its profile data, and then also to provide some quick visualizations that allow for some quick comparison, either between two target group populations or a target group data across two locations. As I said before, it's not the only way to use the TGP data, but it's a really useful starting point, I hope. So we did a poll off the top, and I think a number of you have joined probably since we did the poll. I have tried And thank you to many of the leads involved in the community data program who did do a little bit of early testing for us as well to try and get a sense of how this tool will operate in different operating systems. It was designed in Excel 2013, so for anyone using 2013 or versions later, that should be relatively straightforward for you. I have run a compatibility tool on the 2013 version as well, and it's identified a few possible issues. I didn't see anyone with older versions of Excel dating from 2003 and earlier. I think a few 2007 and 2010 users were there. So we may see a little bit of an issue around functionality and formatting, and it would be great if, as we go through the tool, if users who are in any of those versions of Excel notice an issue, that's worth noting for us as well. So, you can use the chat or send us an email to let us know. I have certainly continually revising the tool. The version that we shared with you, we've called version 1.0. I've already begun a version 1.1, which has just got one typo and a couple of little formatting things, nothing major at this stage. But the intention, I think, would be to gather as much as we can from everyone here today as well. If you notice anything as you're working away at it too, that we can adjust before we release this through the community data program to all users as well. We'll go through these when we actually do the exercise of working with them, but these are kind of some of the things that I encourage people to look for as we are digging into the charts particularly, but also the data. As much as it's nice to try a one-size-fits-all data visualization template, we all know that that's going to have different results for different populations, and sometimes that will mean you'll need to have a look and reset some axis bounds around the charts, making sure that labels are readable and appropriately sized. Are there any strange or nonsensical values that are going on there as well? So those are kinds of things that we'll want to look out for, and I'll take you through these things in particular as we look at the data in the template.
In there, and I'm going to send it directly to you now.
So, okay, we are not going to questions and discussion now. We're going to actually look at the tool itself. Have we had any questions that need addressing in the meantime in the chat?
Sorry, the template was meant to go in a follow-up registration email. So if you didn't get it, that's fine. We'll just get it to you as soon as we can. If you did get it and got a chance to actually use it, even better, because I think you'll be able to get more for it now. Okay, so I see lots of people didn't get it. So just keep an eye on your email, and I'll try to get out to you ASAP. And meanwhile, keep.
Okay, so I need to share my screen now. Oh, thank you. Yep, there we go. Okay, so here we go. I already have it open. So when you open it up, you should be on this front page here. Let me just open up the chat box so I can keep an eye on how we're doing in the chat too. Okay, lots of emails still popping up. So I'll go a little slowly here so that we give everyone a chance to get a copy and open that up. You can see there's a whole lot of tabs here across the bottom of this particular template. I can actually stretch it out, and I'm going to just take you through all of that to give you a sense of what's going on with this and what it's doing, and then we'll do a couple of examples of pulling data out of one of these target group profile AVI files for Beyond 2020, and it's really just a matter of pasting the data into the template and then doing a little spot checking on the charts that you're getting populated as a result. So here's your intro page in the template. Again, it just gives you a bit of a background around what a target group profile is, what I've kind of covered in the initial slides, and And then it also provides that same link on population universes that I mentioned before. To be clear, that here for all the target group profiles, we are talking about the private population in private households universe. As of October 15th, and I don't think we've had anything added in the intervening weeks in terms of new ones, but we are expecting new ones, and so we'll update this list as well. But these are just some direct links for you to the target group profiles on the Community Data Program website. So it takes you right there. So for example, you can see this one is by age groups. It's got a whole range of age groups there. And for those interested in the geographies, for example, here we've got province, territory, census division, census subdivision. We've got CMA, census agglomeration, census tract. We've got aggregated dissemination areas, and we also have custom geographies. Not every target group profile has that range of geographies available, but most of them do have at least the top two there. And Mike will correct me if I'm incorrect on that. Oh no, he's busy posting a link to be able to access the template. Okay, great. So again, it's really just a matter of accessing those. So you can click on them directly through the template, but of course you can also find them right in the community data website, and it's really the simplest way to, if you're specifically looking for the target group profile, it's just a matter of clicking that target group profile under product group, filtering that, and there you go. You've got the whole list of them there. And yeah, the most recent one is still included on the template. So at the moment, everything listed here is all the available ones at the moment. You can see that covers quite a range of different kinds of populations. And so we've got age groups, we've got some education level. Some of these you'll also notice are ones that have multiple different target groups within them. So the age groups one I just showed you had a whole range of different age groups that you could focus on. The immigration and citizenship status one is another one that comes to mind. Visible minority is also broken out by the various visible minority population groups covered in the census. So there's a whole range of different populations that you can investigate using that. I should point out we weren't sure exactly the best way to make this available to everyone. We ultimately decided that we'd do it as a Creative Commons license. Basically, the idea there is that allows anyone in the community data program to use it as you would any other community data program product, as long as it is not for profit purpose. So other than that, you are free to take this, manipulate it, change it, adjust it to do whatever works for you, which obviously is necessary because a lot of the charts you want to customize those for your own particular purposes. And all that we ask is that you do provide attribution, just like you would for any regular community data program data set. Okay, so next up, we'll go to the instructions tab. Hopefully this is relatively straightforward, but I certainly look forward to feedback on this information to make sure that it's straightforward and understandable. We've had a couple of passes at this, but we're happy to keep refining it to make it accessible for people. But there's the general instructions, and when we go through the process, we'll focus on those a little bit more closely. Then we've got 4 tabs, and this is where we're actually going to paste in the data from the 2 different populations we're interested in. You'll see there's 2 tabs for each. That's because, unfortunately, to fit all the data together in a useful way, StatsCan has to produce 2 separate tables. They are consistent in terms of what the content is, but you can also see they do kind of jump around a little bit. They're broadly consistent around what's there, but not necessarily as organized as it could be for us. So we just, what you really, in terms of the initial interaction, you're going to paste in the data that you want to have into these pages here, and that then gets pulled across into a data table that's organizing it a bit more for you in a consistent fashion with the way that Statistics Canada presents its census profile. So we start with population by age, and here we've got our 2 populations that we're looking at. So the data that's already populated in the tool is at the national level for Canada, and it's comparing one low-income population, so everyone who would count as being in low income under the low income measure after tax, as compared to the overall total population. So now you'll go, oh, wait a minute, where did you get the total population from? Because we know we can't just take the regular census profile and pop that in there. Well, again, as you saw with some of these examples, let me find one that will work. Why do that when I can just do this? We'll see how our website's holding up. Okay, good. All the downloading has not affected the website so far. That's great. You can see here we've got a range of target group profiles here, but one I've got is the total population by age. So I've got the total population right there in that target group profile for age, and so I can pull total population data from this particular target group profile to have it as a comparator against a specific population. Oh, and thanks, Mike. You've put it far more succinctly for me than I was doing it. Anyway, so what that does now is you also will see, the data is presented in a flat format. So we've got total population by age, then we've got age groups of males and age groups of females. So here on the data tab, it's instead pulled it out. So you've got them side by side. You can see that split. You've got them there all the way down. So these 6 columns, B through G, are just pulling the data across from these 4 tabs and reformatting it and organizing it. All this stuff over on the side here is doing some reformatting to support some of the charts that I'm going to show you on the next tab. But you can see it sort of starts with population by age, then you've got marital status, but we don't have a lot about families and households, again, because we're really only looking at individuals here. We do have persons not in census families. That's one that does get used. And then we also have right into the language, for example. Now, I'll get into the language a little bit more in terms of the way that it's organized. It isn't set up in a straight nested hierarchy the way that Statistics Canada presents it, because it's set up so that we can pull some of that data across and extract what are the top spoken languages in any particular population for any particular area. And I'll take you into that in a little bit more detail when we get there. That's what all these tabs along the edge here are to support, is to be able to calculate top 10s for a variety of these larger categories like ethnicity, birth country, and then languages like mother tongue, home languages, work languages, and knowledge of languages. So you can see we scroll down, we've got a whole bunch of that data is all being pulled across, and you've got lots of data comparatively. You can go and look specifically for that. And if your main interest here is really just make it easy to draw a quick comparison and extract a really specific data piece, that's really helpful. To be honest with you, one of the things I find I do with this tool now that I hadn't been doing before is I'm trying to just draw one particular data point about a population in a specific area, and I sort of go, okay, well, so for this particular part of the city, what is the income of people who are living in low income? And I think, oh, well, I could extract that straight from the table, but I don't remember which table I need to open up. I'm going to have to be going through and figuring that all out. So often I'll open up the template, scroll down, go income statistics. Oh, yeah, okay. I can see up here in my formula bar, it's pulling from part 2. So I go, oh, okay, I just need to open up. So if I don't want to go through the whole process of doing that, but I want to quickly find that, I now at least know it's in the part 2 table, not the part 1 table. So just a little side benefit of this approach. But again, you can see we've got all the economic data there. We've got low income status data, citizenship, immigrant status, aged immigration, all the way through location of birth and such. So all of that data is pulled across, and then you can see the calculations further over to the right are helping us set up some of the charts and tables. So the charts are set up to be able to help us visualize the differences between these two populations. They're really very much focused on comparing two specific population groups or two specific locations to be able to draw the comparisons between the two. And so in some cases you may actually want to just know the actual number and you're not interested in the percentage comparisons. Most of these charts, of course, are focused on percentage because if you're comparing a much smaller to a much larger population, we need to know the relative sizes, not the absolute sizes. But that's a reason for being aware that you can just come straight to that data tab and go straight to the data point you're looking for if you just need data. And of course, you can certainly, if you are looking to reformat this to be more absolute values, you can certainly develop charts to do that as well. But these are focused on comparisons. So the first one, of course, we see is just a straight population pyramid. It's looking at your 5-year age groups, and we can see that the low-income population certainly has a really significant wider base here among younger people. We certainly know that using low-income measure, children and youth do tend to be the highest percentage of low-income groups amongst the population. You can also see the much more gendered difference in terms of, particularly in aging, around the low-income population. Certainly much more dominated by the female population than the population as a whole, although certainly with women living longer, we do see a little bit of that trend in the regular population as well. So, you can start drawing those kinds of comparisons. So moving on from the population pyramid, a lot of the other charts are these sorts of bar charts that allow you to have a look at it. One of the things we'll find, of course, is that sometimes when the values get particularly small for some of this, you might find that it can get very cluttered. So if I were to say, put all the labels on, these 2% values start cluttering in a bit. I want to be able to maybe just say, you know what, if it's less than 3%, let's not stick a label on it. We know it's a smaller value. And so this label cutoff value allows you to adjust that and affect that right there as well. You may also, looking at some of these, say, ultimately, I'm not that interested in looking at the comparison of both the population and how it plays out between the sexes of male and female. I really want to focus just on a particular population. So sorry, I did that really quickly. I'm going to right-click, I'm going to select my data, and I'm going to actually turn off the male and female. I just want to compare the overall populations. That makes it a little bit cleaner and easier to see. Maybe I say, I can throw the labels back in. It's not so cluttered. There we go. That's a much more straightforward comparison of the marital status of the low-income population as compared to the total population as a whole. So a lot of what you'll want to do once you've loaded the data in is to come through and start doing some sense making with this and saying, does this make sense? Is this a useful thing to focus on? Do the data points make sense? We're looking at how many people live in private households but not in census families. Okay, well that makes sense probably that more low-income peoples are not in families. That probably is true in communities across the country. And we can start looking through a whole range of other things. How do the languages spoken by these two different populations compare? So knowledge of official languages, not a actually really significant distinction, except we see a little bit, maybe a bit more here in terms of bilingualism, and also certainly a higher proportion of the population who are living in low income are not able to speak either of the country's official languages. Then we start getting into some of these ranking exercises where it's more a matter of saying, okay, well there's a whole bunch of different languages that are covered by the census. We want to focus on the ones that are most prevalent in a population, and obviously a lot of the time you will see English as the most prevalent, or in other parts of the country it'll be French, and in some communities you might see other languages more prevalent as the mother tongue. But what this does is it pulls out the lowest level languages around this particular category of mother tongue, and it formats it so that we can put it in a chart showing us the top values. So this is probably the most complicated part of the tool. I'm just going to hop over to this page where we're calculating it. So what this is doing here is it's pulling over data for mother tongue single responses from the page where we've organized the data, and it's just got all of the languages, and it's pulling across the value associated with it, and then this next column is assigning a rank to it. So it's just a little formula that basically says, okay, this number here for English, where does it rank in the whole list of the languages that we have, the long list of mother tongue languages? And then we're doing the same thing over here for the total population, right? The different numbers there. That allows us to then do another little formula that says, okay, for the number one ranking, what is the language? And it goes and it looks, and then what is the value associated with that language? And so we get this table here. So I've actually got a table of the top 20. Just to, if you wanted to have a little bit more data, that's there. So just be aware we've done 20. You could actually even pull that further down and extend that. The COUNTIF function, I see there's a question in the chat there. The COUNTIF function in this formula, what it's doing is it's helping prevent, help deal with ties, I believe. I actually didn't write this initial code, but it helps deal with that situation where we will get a lot of ties where, particularly where you may have zero values, and you'll get a lot of tie scores, and we actually want a numeric rank. So it's sort of assigning a rank, so a tie won't show up necessarily as a tie there. It just means in terms of automating this, it makes it easier to deal with on this end. So you could actually have values that are tied, but they'll still be ranked. And that's part of the reason for when we present it over in the charts here, to put the number alongside it like we do here, so that you can see the value. And of course here, I mean, the distinction and the difference between the top and the bottom of the top 10 is so significant that you're not seeing a lot of visual difference between German and Punjabi, for example, in terms of the actual bar. You actually do need to see that value there as well. So that's just a little piece to help with making that calculation function run a little bit more smoothly. I hope that answers your question, Sonia, but if not, please do follow up in the chat. So essentially, you could even just extend these down, add more rank values. You could rank the whole thing out if you wanted, but typically we find for a lot of these things, top 15, top 10 are generally quite useful. And in terms of the chart is only pulling across the top 10 at this stage. You could, of course, go and select the data, edit the data range, and change what you like in there. Certainly what we sometimes do is we don't want it to be dominated by the English language. We're more interested in Toronto, certainly in non-English speakers. So we would turn off English. And there we go. Now we've only got top 10, but I could, or top 9, but I could also, of course, select another one, add it in as well. So, there's lots of formatting that you can do to make these tell the story you're looking for as well. You can see we've got that same kind of set of calculations here for home language most often spoken at home, top language used at work, top known languages, same calculations, and then also for top birth country, this is doing both immigrants and recent immigrants. And then ethnicity, of course, is another category that has a lot of really specific languages here. Now, one of the things I should note for people looking at this, the way that the census does present the language data is in kind of a nested format, as I mentioned earlier. So it will have language groups. So for example, you can see for the Aboriginal languages, it's got Algonquin languages under which Blackfoot is one category, and then the Cree-Montagnais languages have a whole range of languages under there, whereas Eastern Algonquin have a whole range under there as well. And then you can see I've got these language groups, these higher language groups, and then I've separated out the specific languages that we're using in the ranking. So I will admit that one decision that was made that, in certain places we may want to look at doing a different way, and it may be a matter of changing this up a little bit to allow us to look at Aboriginal languages more specifically in communities where you want to understand those languages a bit more clearly. We'd need to do some formatting on this, because at the moment we have just instead pulled across Aboriginal languages as an entire group into the language groups over here. You can see English, French, Aboriginal languages, and then all of these are the bottom level I guess actually the StatsCan's term for it would be immigration or immigrant languages. So all the languages other than Indigenous English and French languages. So I recognize that, again, that may be a piece that is that doesn't work for everybody. If you need to know more about the specific languages spoken by the Indigenous populations in your communities, you'll need to be aware that at the moment it's just pulling that across. Certainly at the moment you can certainly see if that's an issue, because if you're looking at a population and that is hitting in your top number ones, then that's something you'll want to make sure you're looking at this data as well, and maybe looking to customize your charts here a bit to include those rather than exclude them from the analysis. Again, unfortunately, one of those challenges of trying to design something that can be as flexible yet also deals with some of the specific challenges we'll see, with particular needs in specific communities. That said, that's the kind of the standard approach taking this tool to the languages for all of the 4 language categories where we've got the data, and then we've got other examples here, other languages regularly spoken at home, so on and so forth. We've got income data, median income and mean income by various types of income here. The composition of your overall income, right? You can see significant comparison here that employment income makes up a much smaller proportion of the overall income of individuals living in low income. And then we can also compare income groups between those populations as well. You can see, unsurprisingly, many more individuals clustered at the low end of the income spectrum in the low income group. This one here, it does allow some sort of sense of the economic families that people are living in. What this does is it compares the incomes of the target populations against the incomes of the overall Canadian population. So unsurprisingly, when we're looking at the total overall Canadian population, we are seeing that the incomes are split exactly into those deciles representing the decile populations there. And then in terms of the low income after tax population, we're seeing a focus here on the entire population is falling within the bottom 2 deciles, that their family income for comparable family size is falling only in the bottom 20% of families in Canada. We've got a question about the use of LIM versus LICO. I think there are lots of different reasons for using the different income measures. I read nothing into the fact that there was a choice here. You can use all of them as you like, and if you want, we can certainly have a discussion about preference for low income measures, but we'll probably push that to the end of the presentation, if that's all right. You can actually look at and compare. Okay, well, what does the low income rate under low income look like for low income after tax? Unsurprisingly, the low income measure after tax population is 100%, right? That is the population, and then you can actually see the overall rate for the population as well. You can also investigate things like the low income cutoff and say, well, okay, of all the people in low income under the low income measure, these are the rates that they experience low income as measured by the low income cutoff. So you can see only, for example, of seniors, only 32% of seniors in low income under the low income measure read as low income under the low income cutoff. So you start to get a sense of the impact of those different low income measures as well. And the example I'll do will also give us a bit of a sense of what's going on with the latest on the scene, the market basket measure as well. I'm going to just kind of quickly take us through the rest of the content here, so we have a bit more time to focus on questions at the end. I want to get a good couple of goes in here quickly as well with some of the data. But immigration and citizenship, we get that data. We have period of immigration, so you can sort of see this is presented as percentage of the total population or as percent of the immigrant population. These two things are the same kind of data, but being presented as a percentage of the whole as compared to as a percentage of just immigration. And then we can also look at that for population by region of birth. We can see that there's some slight differences there as well. Again, I can adjust that cutoff if I don't want those 0% values being labeled. I can increase my cutoff here, get rid of those like that as well. So we got immigrants by region of birth, and then also by specific birth countries as well. Sorry, Judy, I just noticed that you asked me to say that again, but I don't know how far along I got before. Okay. So top birth countries for recent immigrants and for all immigrants. It's important to know when looking at these two things that the actual reported countries for both of these two categories are based on the overall population of the top 50 source countries. So there are 50 countries listed in this data, as well as then for countries that didn't make the top 50, it became other places of birth in, say, Asia or Africa or in the Americas. Whereas for recent immigrants, those top 50 countries are going to be a little bit different. So you will occasionally see some different and confusing and conflicting results between these two charts. And we'll have a look at that with some of the recent immigrant data in one of the examples. I do apologize. I know I'm going a little quickly. Again, the session is being recorded, and you'll be able to review it. But we will also be going through this a bit more with the data posted into it as well. Generation status, admission category is other data. There's also data about Aboriginal identity, registered or treaty Indian status, and Aboriginal ancestry. There's data about visible minority populations, and there's also data about ethnic origins. So this is about your ancestry going back to your grandparents or further. What ancestries do you identify with? So for that, we've also got it grouped by world regions, but also again the top categories that we see there as well. The top responses, I should say. Education, we have two different groupings of highest certificate achieved for the population age 15 or older, or only for the population age 25 to 64. So again, you can look at the relative education levels between those populations. What your major field of study for your highest degree was for those with a post-secondary certificate or higher. Again, for age 15 plus or for age 25 plus, so you can look at the educational background of those two populations. Location of study, did you study in the same province or territory or another province or territory or outside Canada? And then also, if you did study outside Canada, some of the major source countries for education outside of Canada, as well as a larger other category as well. Again, that's for 15 and 24-year-olds as well. And there's data about labor force, and place of work status. There's questions about your commuting, destination. Do you work within the same census subdivision? Do you work within the same census division? Do you work within the same province, or do you commute to a different province? Your main mode of commuting, drive, passenger, walk, cycle, public transit. How the length of your commute. What language do you work in? And then what was your mobility status 1 year ago and 5 years ago? So, so there again, you're just comparing those two populations, and you can sort of see, for example, that non-movers is a higher proportion for the population that's not in low income. So we've got a question from one of the LINs, and in Ontario we do have the LIN subregions available as a custom geography for some of these. Not every one of these templates is not every one of these target group profiles is available at a custom geography, but many of them do allow for that. Okay, so let's actually dig in and see how this might actually work. So I think there was an interesting question earlier about which low-income measures you should use, and one of the interesting things that has come up in recent developments is that the federal government and the federal poverty reduction strategy has selected the market basket measure, one of the 3 available low-income measures through the census, as an official poverty line for the country. And there's, I think, an interesting question of, well, so how does that compare, and how does the population under market basket measure compare to some of the other low-income measures? So I thought, well, maybe the first thing we could do is compare the low-income measure population to the market basket measure population. So I'm going to want to insert data for the market basket measure population as a new comparator instead of the total population. So I'm going to leave Canada the same, but if you have these data files already downloaded, hopefully you were already tipped off to that, and you have had the chance to access those files. I think if we all rush and try and download them now, we may crash the system. But if you have them on hand, then you can do that. It is not going to work with the standard census profile. I don't think it works with the custom geo census profile, but you know what? You can have a look and see if it is set up the same way. So I'm going to leave Canada the same for this one. I'm not going to, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that one, but I'm going to extract data for the market basket measure population for Canada, and I'm going to paste that in here instead, and then we'll look at some of the charts and see how that population is different. So I've already downloaded and extracted those. I've got my limbs here, but I've got the target group profile for the market basket measure. You can see I've got two of these tables already here. I'm just going to click that and open it up in Beyond 2020. And maybe in the background I'll also open up the instructions here. So we've already hit step 1. We've decided what we want to compare. We are comparing we're comparing at the Canada level for both, so that's comparable, and we're comparing 2 different target group profiles, so we're good there. They're going to be comparable because they're both drawing from the same population universe. So I've got to work in this in this target group profile file here to find what I'm looking for. Well, I want to organize this so that it's basically in the same kind of structure as we've got it in the template. So first of all, I want to select my country. I'm going to use the Canada data. I'm going to go and I'm going to select Show. So now I've just got Canada isolated. It's going to be a little clearer for me to work with. And I can just flip that, and you can see now here I've got it all set up just the same. I'm going to copy this, and then I can come over here and whoop, it doesn't quite want to do it, right? So one of the challenges is if you're doing it that way, it may be easier to do an intermediary step of pasting it in first. Here I've got it. I can look at it. I can say, okay, this is how I've got it set up. Yeah, this has a bit more space over here. I've got an extra line. So lining it up is important. I'm going to just select all my data there. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paste it. You can see I had to paste it one row down here because of the way that one was organized. But it's all lined up nicely there. I've got that there. I know I've got my first one done. And again, I'm pasting that as pasting values. So I'm not messing with any of the formatting. I'm just throwing the values right into there. I've already got that there. And I know for this, I'm not actually interested in it as Canada here so much as I'm interested in being MBM. So I'm just going to type in MBM there. And I'm going to do the same thing now for part 2, the part 2 table. Okay, same thing, part 2 table here. Open it up. I want Canada. I'm going to show just Canada. I'm going to drag that down so that now we've got it organized here in the same way that I've got it in the table. I'm going to select that whole column and copy it. And then when I come over here, I'm just going to use an intermediary sheet here just to make sure I'm lining things up properly. Again, there's a nice little keyboard shortcut of Control, Shift, and down to be able to select all the information down. That's what I'm doing to do that quickly. And then Control C to copy. And I'm pasting it one row down to make sure it lines up. Perfect. And this is MBM. There we go. Okay, so it's pasted. Now let's go have a look at our data. Right here we're seeing a little bit more lining up, but we see under the market basket measure there's actually fewer Canadians who are in low income according to the market basket measure than the low income measure after tax. Okay, that's all great. Let's have a look at our charts and see what it looks like here. So one of the criticisms that has been leveled at the market basket measure is that it does not effectively capture, or it captures a much lower rate of low income among seniors. And if we look at these two, you can see, looks like the criticism holds, but first things first, we've got to make sure that we're using comparable baselines here. We have a large group here showing up in the market basket measure. I've got to adjust my bounds for my axis here. I'm going to format my axis, and I'm going to make it 0.5 for both of these and 0.1 like that so that it's consistent. Now when I do that, now I've got 5%, 5%. Now these are comparable distributions. What are we seeing? We are definitely seeing that the market basket measure shows much higher low-income rates among younger Canadians than it does among older Canadians. Right? That helps us see the same kind of issue that is being raised as concern around what that means in terms of what likely interventions will be used to help lower poverty as measured by the market basket measure rate will likely be leveled to focus on this population, and we need to pay attention to what it means for our seniors. What this tool now allows you to do is to say, hey, how would that play out in our own communities as well? And I want to compare the impact of those two ways of understanding low income in terms of the overall population. If we start looking through, we're probably going to see a lot of similarity for some of this, but for example here, market basket measure, again, that more youth-oriented, higher number of youth is also showing up in the never married marital status population, I would imagine. Again, we're seeing a little bit more, slightly more people not living in census families under the market basket measure. A slightly different mix here in terms of fewer French-only speakers as a percentage of the total language for the market basket measure. Here we can see, okay, pretty consistent in terms of the top languages we see spoken. German has dropped out, Korean has entered the top 10, bit of a switch between Urdu and Punjabi, but some relative consistency there around language communities. and we can kind of look on through and see, what else do we see. I think a lot of what we see in terms of these differences will be in part driven by the difference in ages, and that's important to keep in mind, right? We're looking at different ages of populations, so things like income obviously also will vary throughout the life course in terms of the degree to which government transfers maybe are part of your income certainly is different. There was actually, for those of you who follow the daily news releases from Statistics Canada, there was a really interesting piece today around how government transfers and income have the gendered effect of those tools in terms of reducing low income. So if you're really keen on finding out more about the low income question and that kind of stuff, there's a really cool report to check out on StatsCan today. Anyway, so we're looking at income comparisons here. We can see some higher incomes overall in the low income measure after tax than the market basket measure. That really low government transfers income, median income for men under the MBM, and so on. So, a lot of opportunity to compare here. Here again is another one where I would pay attention quickly. We want to check and make sure, okay, have we got those going as well? So, and I've just noticed the question there about using the template with multiple geographies, census tracts, for example. Yes, I mean, the idea here is we could easily have, instead of selecting Canada, if I show all, I could say I actually only care about census tract number 1 in St. John's, and I want to focus on that. So as long as I've got census tract data for both of the populations that I want to look at, I could compare just 2 census tracts. And so that's the benefit there. I'm just using the Canadian example because it's one we can all have some kind of connection to. Again, here, if we look at the market basket measure, 75% of people who are in low income under the market basket measure are in the bottom decile, and then 24%. And then we actually have some people in the third decile, despite it looking like we've got a larger concentration in the bottom as well. So a different kind of spread of family income. So you're probably having some difference between the way that families are structured having an impact on whether or not they are low income under low income measure versus the market basket measure. Again, we can sort of say, okay, 100% for low income measure makes sense, but 86% of people under the market basket measure who are in low income are also low income under the low income measure. But we can see there's that little gap of difference there. And again, that third low income measure, the low income cutoff, we're seeing some very different variations, right? I mean, 32% and 55% for seniors. We're seeing some very different impacts of those measures for the older populations. I think a lot of these we will probably see as being fairly similar. I'm going to scroll through again. I might go, oh, I don't want that there. I'm going to take those labels off. And we can move right on through. Let's have a quick look at source countries. We're seeing quite similar here in terms of the source countries of immigrants for both of these. Some slight changes up and down, but largely the same source population, source countries. Pretty similar along generation status too, so whether you were born outside Canada or born in Canada to at least one parent born outside Canada, or whether you were born in Canada, Canadian-born parents, still pretty consistent across those two different measures of low income. Pretty similar for Aboriginal identity and for treaty status and ancestry, right? Pretty similar values are seeing across those two measures. And a slightly more representation of racialized populations, visible minority groups in the market basket measure than we see under the low income measure. And ethnic origins, education, Lots of similarities there. So I'm going to do one more example with you, and if you've got yours open as well, and you can do a version of this on your end, that may be a useful exercise too. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try an entirely different population, but instead I'm going to look at a particular population across two geographies. So I want to look at the newcomer population, so people who were landed as immigrants in Canada in the 5 years leading up to the census. And I want to look at that for a specific geography and compare it to another geography. So what I want to do here is I'm going to start by picking a census division. So I'm going to go, let's say I want to look at, well, we'll do Toronto, why not? So let's say I want to find Toronto, whoops, pardon me. I am looking for, what am I doing here? There we are. So under that I'm doing search. I'm looking for English description. I'm going to type in the word Toronto, and I'm going to select the Toronto Census Division and just show that. And I'm going to flip them around again so I can do that. And here I've got now a Toronto Census Division cut of a population here, but I also need to now pick a specific population. So I'm going to drag that down. This is a broader target group profile that has a range of immigration and citizenship profiles within it. I want to focus on 2011 to 2016, so I'm just going to show that one. So I'm going to copy those numbers, and you can see again we're looking at much smaller numbers now that we've drilled down to a city and to a specific population. But I'm going to copy that. Again, I'm going to use a go between just to make sure I'm lining everything up properly. Okay, and here we can see I'm going to need to post right to the top. So I'm going to go copy, and I'm posting into my main here. So paste. So here I'm going to put, instead of that, I'm going to put newcomer. And here I'm going to put, oh, actually, I'm sorry, I'm comparing two geographies. So here I'm going to put Toronto, and here I'm going to put newcomers. I'm just going to do that quickly for table 2 as well, and then we'll pull up a comparator as well. So there's part 2. And again, I want to select my geography. I'm going to go dimension search, English description, Toronto. Select the census division. And then I want to select, the specific population that I want as well. There we go, show that, boom. Copy all of that. I'm going to play it safe, paste it into a go-between first. And then I can select all of that, copy it over, and I'm going to paste it here. And again, this is going to be Toronto. So far, if I go over here now and look at the data, I've got two entirely different things. It's not going to make any sense at all. I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, wait a minute, I'm comparing Toronto versus the MBM for Canada, right? Okay, let's get the comparator in there so that we're making some sense here. So what I want to do is I want to look at what does the profile of recent immigrants look like in the city of Toronto as compared to the Toronto CMA. So I'm going to open up a CMA CA census tract table here. Again, I want to show that. I'm going to bring this down so I can look for the specific geography that I want. I'm going to go English description, and I'm going to type Toronto again, but this time it's the CMA. I can tell that by the code numbers, but you can also see from the much higher number that we're talking with a regional number here as well. So, oops, what did I do here? Let's get that back here. Let's show just that, and let's bring these down. Okay, so thanks, Sonia. It's just me. So I'm going to paste this in, and again, copy. Just going to come over here. I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to put Toronto CMA. And finally, we're going to do one more here. I've got to open up one last table. Dimension, search, English description, Toronto. Okay, and then drag that down, and I only want the 2011 to 2016. I'm going to copy that again. Finally, here's our fourth one. Do I dare do it directly? I do. There we go. Toronto CMA. Okay, let's see what we've got. So, obviously, the City of Toronto is completely included in the Toronto CMA, so we would expect all the numbers to be bigger for the recent immigrant population in the CMA as compared to the city itself. So that makes sense. That's the first thing I'm just going to have a quick look at. Great. Let's use some of the visualizations and see what we're looking at. Okay, first thing we find is the newcomer population is much more dominated by people in their 25 to 40 range here. I need to adjust my axes here. I'm going to do a format. I'm just going to try resetting. All right, it doesn't want to be perfect for me, so let's go with 10% as the edges on each of those. There we go. Maybe I don't need to have that quite so much, and I can adjust that as well. Oh, didn't. There we go. Okay, and let's do the same on this one here. And again, for users of different versions of Excel, this may be a slightly different process for you, but it should be broadly comparable, especially for folks who have later versions as well. So again, you see I've set now a consistent axis across the two that allows us to see the entirety of the data. And we're seeing, you know, some interesting similarities for sure, right? The dominant 30 to 34 age range there. We are also seeing probably a slightly more youthful focus in the city itself, a slightly older population within the whole CMA as a comparator there. If I look at marital status, you see again, slightly more folks are within the CMA are married as compared to the center city. That's not particularly surprising. I'm going to take the 2% values off. Nope, we're going to take the 3% values off to narrow that down, but we can see not a lot of difference there really. That's between the single never married versus the married population is the big distinction there. Fairly similar here, some slight differences around knowledge of official languages. Let's have a look here in terms of language groups. That's where we're going to maybe start seeing some interesting differences. And again, it's largely in terms of the relative size here. English is the top mother tongue. Then we see Tagalog following up among the newcomer population in Toronto, whereas Mandarin within the CMA is dominant. Spanish is much higher up in the overall rankings in Toronto than it is in the CMA, right? So we can keep comparing those kinds of differences across those two different geographies. Not a lot around language spoken at home in terms of differences. And again, we're seeing the same kinds of differences there. Tagalog slightly more prevalent in the city, whereas Mandarin slightly more prevalent in the region. Incomes seem to be a little bit higher among newcomers in Toronto than those spread across the CMA, and that is a little bit less pronounced when you actually look at the mean values. And we can continue to go through and look. slightly more people, a slightly larger concentration of newcomers in the city itself in very low income situations as compared to the CMA. But when we look at the economic family income decile group, we see that same kind of distribution, really obviously heavily weighted towards the low end of the income deciles. And there's your prevalence of low income rates. We're seeing higher rates of low income for newcomers within the city than the region under both of those measures, LIM and LICO there. So I think we've probably covered most of like the use of the tool. I can see a few questions building up. Maybe now is a good time to shift and take some questions. I'll maybe should I keep the screen share up so that if people have particular questions, we can tackle that. But I do see one, for example, from Ashley asking about the workaround. Oh, but Mike has already answered it. Okay, great. Yes, so if you do want to have that total population figure, but you want to make sure it's a comparable population figure, yeah, you need to use that from one of these target group profiles, like the age group one, that allows you to click and say, I've got a total in here. I do, well, let's show all here. We do also have a total immigrant status and period of immigration here. So if you were looking to want to compare the total population here, you've got one nicely already built in to be able to compare immigrants versus newcomers versus non-immigrants versus non-permanent residents. You've got that whole kind of range there available to compare. And Mike has also rightly pointed out that the visible minorities TGP also has that total population as well. So, so where do we go from here? Well, the goal is for this to be a living document, for us to learn from users. So what we'd like to do is make this available to folks, and let you use it and get to work on it, and hopefully make it much more easy to access data from your target group profiles quickly and easily. And your reflections in terms of, is the content here useful? I realize I didn't get into the tables as well. I should point out there are some that we've populated through, but there may be more that would be of interest to people. Let me just make that a little smaller here. So for example, you can see this is showing newcomers, Toronto versus Toronto CMA, marital status, income of individuals, prevalence of low income. Particularly, I think of interest to people is having things like the number of unemployed population and the relative rates and such, right? As well, so you've got those there. But again, the feedback around what is useful, what could we do to improve, where things weren't working very well, would all be great. And with relatively straightforward tweaks, we can tackle that.
12 minutes of Heath's
Alan, thank you. We've got the low income questions ready to tackle there. Yeah, we'll get to that. Do we have anything else specific to the profile in the meantime?
We're going to spend some time with this over the next week or so, manipulate your own geographies and your own data, and please get feedback to us. I think this is one of the really great tools that comes out of having a network through the community data program. This is a tool that Heath has just been working on because it's something he needed for his own work and has really spent the time to make it available to everybody else. I think it's one of the great ways to make all of this data a lot more accessible to us. So please just take that time as well to get your feedback. Keith, do you want to go ahead and type your email address right into the chat box too? Because I think that might be the best way to get feedback directly back to you as well. If you can just email him directly. You can also always send stuff to us at the community data program, and we will make sure it gets back to Heath as well. And Alan, I'll let you know too that we are working on a webinar where we are going to talk about low income measures specifically. And so watch for that in your newsletters and email invites, because that's definitely a hot topic for this group. Is there anything else, particular questions for Heath? I imagine you're going to get a few more Heath through the next couple of weeks as people are actually trying to go through with their own geographies. As we wait for everybody's time.
Alan, could you expand a little bit on what you mean by taking LICO TGP 25% for income purposes from Census Profile? Maybe if you can expand on that a little bit. I'm not quite clear what you're telling me there.
I believe about the idea of using the template for 2 census tracts, and I imagine you can just do a simple addition. Can you get a geography that covers 2 census tracts? Mm-hmm. Okay.
The challenge there is that, I mean, you certainly can do that, but you will have some data that isn't easily added together. So where you have median values or the occasional percentage value that doesn't provide you an appropriate denominator, then it's a challenge to be able to merge those two together. So if you wanted to do that, you could actually add those together, but it wouldn't automatically flag that for you. You'd just get nonsensically high values for things like average income, median income, some of those sorts of things that wouldn't necessarily make sense. So we do that a fair bit here at the city as well, City of Toronto, because we often try and get some of our neighborhood level data out that we base on census tracts, but we amalgamate 3 or 4 census tracts together. And so sometimes we want to get the data out as quickly as we can and not wait for our custom geography orders to come in. So we'll do that same thing. So for example, for our neighborhood profiles, we put the data out with everything that we could use, because there's lots of useful information there without having access to that. And then we just sort of said, when we get the custom geography data in, then we'll renew and update and refresh it and put the median values and the percentage values in and that sort of thing. And that's kind of how we've approached doing it. In this tool, you can certainly do that. Again, you just need to be mindful of where you're going to get some nonsensical data, because it's not actually something you can add up. And of course, that is also one of the values of our custom geographies as well with the community data program, is knowing that when you do have some good custom geographies available, that gets you past all of that worry as well, and you can just work directly from the custom geographies of the target group profile for those for which we do have those. So yeah, Alan raises an interesting kind of idea, and maybe what I will do is I will just quickly close and reopen this file without saving it to show what I'm thinking here. So I'm not going to save that, and I'm just going to quickly reopen my template. Where have I got it stored here? It's not on the shared screen. Okay, here we go. Not that one, but this one. So we're back to, and this is a limb data set, but you could do it for LICO as well. So I mean, what we're talking about here is that if you wanted to, for example, say, what is the low income rate among, let's see here, non-official language speakers, right? I could even just sort of put in a little calculation to say that divided by that. That'll give you an estimate. Those are not necessarily completely It's an estimate because I don't think it necessarily has done everything in terms of identifying whether. Oh no, well no, that would be yeah. So I don't know whether the denominator for the total population would necessarily catch everyone who wasn't included in the LIM-AT calculations. There are some populations who do not get included because they're not eligible for the low income measure the way it works. There's actually, so if we scroll down to look at the low income data, gotta go a little further here. You'll see there's a population. So the official definition is low income status for the population of private households to whom low income concepts are applicable. So those low income concepts are not applicable to 100% of the population. So it's not going to be 100% accurate. You would have to sort of think of that as more of an estimate, but you'd probably be in the ballpark pretty close with that to say, you're looking at that 20%. Again, it's more of an estimate. Okay, Sonia I'm not sure if I'm jumping here. Let's see. The next question I see is from Sonia about the charts tab. Okay. So Sonia, can you tell me which version of Excel you are using? Because from what I understand, there may be something around the label formatting. Okay. So that's probably the issue. Unfortunately, that is not something that is necessarily compatible in the 2010 version of Excel. So that might be a problem we're finding, that won't change it. I mean, what that does ultimately mean is, and what I did before I decided to fiddle around with this and set this up is, for ones that were particularly crowded, I would load up all my data, I would save a version of it so that I had it in a separate version, and then I would go through and I'd just go, I don't want this, I'd manually delete the labels that were cluttering things up. That's not ideal, but it's a fairly decent workaround. And then you keep the template as clean. You don't have to redo that every time you want to use it fresh. And you're preserving that particular set of data there, so that you've got that chart ready to go and work from there. That was basically what I was doing beforehand. I can show you essentially the way that it's working. The way that it works is, let's see, we're looking at marital status here. If I scroll all the way over here, I've got an extra piece called chart labels. And really what this is doing is this is saying, hey, if this value here is less than what I entered over here as my cutoff value, then don't show it. So let's make sure I'm looking at marital status. So let's put 25%. I've removed most of the labels there. I come back to data. You can see the formulas are now blank there, where those values were blank. That's what's happening. This is pulling from these labels instead. And in the chart, what 2013 version allows you to do is to label it with a value from cells rather than the base value. Okay, so so I guess unfortunately what we're finding is that this approach to the labels with the value from cells doesn't work in older versions of Excel, 2010 and back. So we may want to make a version available that doesn't have that enhancement and instead just has the value. Your workaround right now is to select to make sure that the labels are pulling the value rather than a particular designated value from cells. I think for those of you who are using 2010 and having issues with that, it may be the simplest thing to do a simpler, older version that doesn't allow that extra label functionality of having the value cutoff. That's pretty easy to strip out and just reformat the charts. So I think that's what we'll have to do going forward. So that's a good, thank you very much, because that's a very helpful thing that we didn't know about until just now. So thank you for experimenting along with us and figuring that out. So that's a piece that it's pretty easy for me to implement, and we'll put that into a version 1.1 that will make sure that it's an Excel 2010 and earlier kind of format.
But I really do appreciate your time to make this more widely available to everybody. Just remind everybody, as he said, this is a work in process that he is, or work in progress. So he definitely appreciates any feedback you can get to him. Please take the time
Absolutely.
to use it in the next couple of weeks. And so we can get a bit of momentum going on it right now. And then it will be available for anybody off of the Community Data Program website at communitydata.ca for your use and members and other people that you know that in the program who want to make use of it. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming and participating and just building up this network, and so we can learn from each other and make a lot more use of the data that we already have. Thank you all, and thank you, Mike, for answering so many of our data questions alongside Heath here. And I can tell we had this was a lot of interest. We went our full hour and a half, and we did not lose very many people as we went. Very engaging presentation, and so as Heath mentioned, he will be able to stick around. So please feel free to ask any more questions if there's anything you would like more information of. Let me pull a PowerPoint up here. My guess is that we have tapped everybody out for today. We will send a follow-up email too, just making sure that you have Heath's email address as well as mine, and just so we can let you know where all of this is available for download as well. Well, I think we will leave it at that. That seems to be all the questions through, although you're getting lots of thank yous and praise here, Heath. So feel free to keep those going. It's always nice to see that and encourage our presentations. It's somewhat of an awkward format sometimes doing these workshops, making sure that people are hearing what you're doing and responding. So it's very much appreciated.